Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis. Continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness, though in some ways I'm wrapping them up, at least for the summer. As I've mentioned previously, I'm going to take a break over the summer and kind of rethink the show, and I may well come back on PRN on a weekly basis in the fall. I might rejigger the show, and I might do something else entirely. I've been doing this for almost a decade, and while the podcast is a hot formula, and I like the show, and we get pretty good numbers, they could be a little better, but they could always be better. That's the problem with numbers. You know, you start quantifying stuff, and then you're comparing, and this guy's got more, and are they doing something better, or who cares? Maybe they have a bunch of fools and you have all the brilliant people, and so then it should count more, but that's a elitist way of thinking. Anyway, the numbers are kind of a mess, but they've been holding steady for a while. Let's just put it that way. And that's another funny thing. Like, so what? They're holding steady. You got a crew of people who love your show. What's the big deal? Why worry about it? Why do we always need to expand, get more and more and more? Isn't that the cancer of capitalism written right there in your own psychology? And yet, there's something about the hamster wheel that kicks in when there's not as much sense of development. So in any case, all of these reasons point to the need for a break. So the best way for folks to keep up with me is to go to my website, Techgnosis, TECHGNOSIS. Have had it for decades, techgnosis.com, and you'll get a nice little mailing list sign up there. And really, I don't send out more than once a month. I'm too lazy to do anything else with it. And I don't give out the names. And that way you'll keep up with me, whatever I end up doing. So that's the recommended route of hanging out. And I'm going to keep doing events the next couple of months. You can also go to events page on Techgnosis to see stuff that's coming up. I'll be in New York City this coming week with a couple of events on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and then over to London for a couple of events the following week. And then I'll be in Amsterdam and Oregon Country Fair, and it goes on and on and on and on, probably more on and on than I want it to be. And some of those events, in fact, one event in particular, a couple events in particular, will be with our guest today. Our guest today is a fine woman and my wife, Jennifer Dumpert, or Dumpert, as they like to say, but people always end up saying Dumpert, so we just kind of go with it. We're going to do a couple of things. We're going to do something in early July at the Mechanics Institute here in San Francisco, celebrating and focusing on her new book, because we both had new books that came out almost exactly at the same time. This was not intended. In some ways, it was a little silly. We're now doing parallel, not very overlapping book tours. But in this one instance, in early July at the Mechanics Institute in San Francisco, we'll be talking about her book, Liminal Dreaming. And then later in August, we'll do an event in Portland and be hanging out at each other's events in Portland and Seattle. So again, enough promo. Go to the website, events page. Now let's turn to our guest, Jennifer Dumpert. Let's talk about dreams. Welcome to Expanding Mind.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And you're like, I think we should say that we actually aren't anywhere near each other. You're far away there in upstate New York.
I'm in upstate New York. I'm on an event running 4 events in 10 days.
How have they been?
So far, pretty good. I did a Sebastopol, I did a New York City, and I did a Toronto. I've been really happy at the numbers, as you were saying earlier. There's always the numbers. I've been pretty happy. I've had full, but even more to the point is I've had a lot of people who have been pretty interested in Liminal Dreaming, my recent book, exploring consciousness at the edges of sleep, and people who are doing some of the exercises and practices in the book, using these states to explore making art or problem solving or coming up with ideas. So that's actually been pretty wonderful.
Well, what have people said about what kind of things have people been using it for that surprised or inspired you? Well, maybe we should say a little bit about it first.
Yes,
so what are the practices that or this idea of liminal dreaming, which is not lucid dreaming. It's not lucid dreaming. It's something else, something in many ways more interesting, at least more unusual. And so maybe talk a little bit about that, and then what kinds of things people are doing with it.
Liminal is a word for between spaces. It comes from the Latin word limen, which is where we get words like limit, and it refers to doorways and thresholds. So liminal dreams happen in the space between awake and asleep. As you're falling asleep, you go through hypnagogia, and hypnos is the Greek god of sleep. Agagos is leading toward, so hypnagogia is kind of leading toward the Greek god of sleep, which is a sort of a nice image. And then as you're waking up, you go through hypnopompia. Again, hypnos and pompe, like pomp and circumstance, it's leading away from. So that's as you're coming out of sleep. And one of the things that characterizes hypnagogia and hypnopompia, which together make up liminal dreaming, is that you are going into dream spaces. You're accessing the unconscious and having dreams, although they're different from REM dreams, but also your waking mind stays online. So you actually have access with your kind of rational thinking mind to what you're experiencing in your dreaming mind. And that makes for a lot of really extraordinary experiences.
You know, it's funny, just because I've been doing a lot of podcasts about high weirdness lately, and I often find myself kind of explaining my method, my own kind of attitude towards it, which is sort of just like what you said, which is what happens when you accept reason, critical thinking, self-awareness, knowledge, but then you take those skills or those aspects of mind into these realms where things get very strange. In my case, talking mostly about psychedelic experience, but also just visionary experience in general. And it's just funny how we're kind of both working in different registers, a similar mix, because it's different than the full dream state, which is like, oh, the amazing symbols or whatever. It's something about this tension between your observing your own process, and yet you're still open to the wonder and the strangeness that's coming online through as you enter or emerge from the sleep state. So it's an interesting resonance there.
I agree. And it's also, so if you're people, for example, you brought up psychedelics and people who are exploring consciousness with psychedelics, and there's a real Venn diagram overlap with that and with liminal dreaming. In fact, I think sometimes I refer to it as dream tripping, because the experiences are so extraordinary and familiar to people who have had experience with psychedelics. So things like that, the kaleidoscopic tunnel swirl of images and associations. People, as I've been giving these presentations, have come up to me and have said, I have found hypnagogia is a lot like DMT, very difficult to bring something back because there's so much happening. And also these experiences are so much more unlike our waking experience. So REM dreams are actually a little bit more like being awake than liminal dreams are. In REM dreams, you're still like a person having experience in a world with a narrative storyline. I mean, and you might be like in a Venice on the moon with squirrels and your dead cat, but you still, usually in the dream, it's credible. Like you think it's happening. You still think you're a person kind of moving through the world. Whereas, so for example, in the liminal dreams, there often isn't a narrative. There often isn't even a you and an other world that you're moving through. There's just like the unfolding moment of this free associative, swirling, kaleidoscopic adventure in mind. So it's, and also, as with the psychedelics, with some of the visionary experiences you're talking about, where it's not business as usual, even when business as usual is really weird.
Yeah, I mean, I like that sense of, and I've had the experience too of being someone who's kind of a natural liminal dreamer, much more than a REM dreamer or a lucid dreamer. Although I've had, plenty of lucid dreams more when I was younger. But while I don't often kind of naturally go into a liminal dream space, I have, and I remember one period of time, it was years ago, where every night it was like I was receiving basically like lessons, like a kind of download of how you navigate these increasingly bizarre worlds of like meta multiple cosmic consciousness. And I remember the next night I would like pick up where I left off and go even farther. And it did have a kind of DMT quality where there was sort of a sense of multidimensional spaces, cosmic information, visually dense sort of geometrical matrices that were unfolding and swirling, and very much a sense of going farther and farther into a mystery. But it's, as I said, it doesn't happen that often. And what are the ways, or like the easiest ways for people to start, cultivating this ability? Because I know that you've been working on cultivating it, and even though in some ways you're a natural dreamer, it's really transformed just because you have been cultivating this practice, and now there's a lot more material there. You can stay there a lot longer. It's really something that seems to respond to our own intentions to practice, which is a lot of what your book is about, and that what most people don't know about. It's like, oh no, you can actually practice with this space. So I know there's a lot of things you talk about in your book, but what's a place for people to start?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. So, and of course, everybody is a natural liminal dreamer. Some people are natural lucid dreamers and they have lucid dreams quite easily, but everybody goes through hypnagogia. Not everyone does hypnopompia, but everyone goes through hypnagogia. And it's one of those things where, and when I tell people, oh yeah, it's a thing, people are like, wow, I never even knew that was a thing. Like I have that experience, but I always just go through it. And so already just saying to people, yes, that thing that happens when you're falling asleep, or when you're struggling to stay awake, because that's another time when you get it. That sort of hallucinatory, often, soundscape, swirling bit of consciousness dream is actually a thing. That's enough. And people, when I tell them, you can stop and pay attention to that, usually most people will then have the experience. So sometimes just hearing about it, like whoever is listening is doing right now, is enough. But there's a lot of practices, a lot of exercises in the book for learning to locate and linger in liminal dream. And one of my favorites is something I call the feedback loop. And it's basically lying back and exhaling out any kind of waking energy, deep exhales to let any tension leave the body, and allowing the hypnagogic dream to form, as it will do if you lie back when you're feeling sleepy. And sometimes that's just points of light, or faces turning towards you. But also sometimes it's a loosening of mind and the beginnings of imagination. So imagination as a faculty of perception is one of the ideas that I talk about a lot in this book. So lying back and letting your imagination kind of start to take over and going into the space of the imagination as your mind is loosening. So exhale out your waking energy, exhale out any tension in your body. Let the dream start to form, loosen the mind, let the imagination kind of take over, and then let the forming hypnagogic dream come into you through your perception, imagination's perception, or through your sort of dream perception. And then it sort of ends up being a feedback loop where you're feeding out your waking energy into the forming hypnagogic dream and letting the forming hypnagogic dream sort of take on a life of its own.
Yeah, it seemed like one aspect of the feedback loop, it's actually, not dissimilar from certain ways of meditating, where let's say you're like, and I've done a lot of meditation where I start out and I don't have a goal, but I just kind of like settle in and maybe, follow my breath for a little while, start to relax, and then something happens, like there's a warm sense in my belly, or I become very aware of the breath at my nostrils, or there's a field of light that begins to pulse. And I'm open to whatever thing comes, but as soon as something like that happens, I'll gently shift my attention to that thing. And not like analyzing it, but just, drawing, shifting it. If I was concentrating on my breath, now I concentrate on the field of light. And it's not the same, but it's similar to that, at least my experience, liminal dreaming, where, like, for example, I'm just relaxing. It's all I'm paying attention to. And I notice that there are these sparks of random light on the inside of my eyelids, in the visual field of the closed eyes. And it's not like I'm going to analyze them, because that'll keep me too awake, but it's really like allowing attention to sort of gently shift and focus on them, and then they start to respond almost to that attention, and you go deeper into the state. Except in this case, you're not maintaining that kind of clarity of awareness. You're actually allowing kind of sleepiness and the sort of marvelous haze of dream tendrils to begin to wrap you up, even as you maintain a little bit of waking. And that seems to be one of the tricks, is as you're going to sleep and you're, eventually going to go to sleep, how do you maintain the awakeness that allows you to, if not remember all these experiences, at least be conscious of them or attentive to them as you go into dream?
So most of the time, if I'm actually practicing with it, insofar as I'm trying to figure out what these exercises are, or I've done a lot, for me, I'm doing a lot of just exploring consciousness, a lot of listening to my mind work, as it were, and seeing what different things I can do, or analyzing the different stages along the continuity of consciousness between awake and asleep. And if I'm doing that kind of thing, I will often do, and it won't be when I'm going to bed at night, because when I'm going to bed at night, I do have a lot of fun in the hypnagogic realm, as I always do, but then you go to sleep. So you don't as much track what's happening. So often I'll do it during naps during the day, or for me in hypnopompia in the mornings. But I also do some playing around. At night is kind of more where I play around. If I'm falling asleep, at night is more where I'm exploring things. For example, I've really been, you said earlier about multidimensional. And one of the things that I've been playing with recently is how many different tracks I can keep my mind on at the same time, which at this point it's kind of like 6, but how many different things can I hold, like dream unfoldings or particular through lines in the hypnagogic or hypnopompic state can I hold on to at once? And that's an amazing experience. Like I've had the experience where dreams run on more than one track at a time, but this is much more like a high level. I'm seeing this world over here that's like a melty, gauzy purple and blue world. And over here, I have the image of a bird made of pieces of glitter. And over here, I have, a rack of albums sitting on the stretch of lawn between my grandparents' house and the street. And I have all of those in my mind at once and down into infinite detail. And so in that case, I'm going to bed and I'm playing around, and I tend to remember those more. But if the answer to your question is, if you really want to work with this or play with this, often napping is really good. 20 minutes lying on the bed or on the couch or whatever, and in the evening or in the afternoon is a great way to go and start to learn to explore this experience. And once you've gained more facility, then you'll remember more as you're going to sleep.
You talk a lot about you talk about some different spiritual or religious dimensions to this in the book. You already mentioned this kind of idea of the imagination, and you can track that idea, and particularly in, Sufi mysticism and the ideas of Henri Corbin, and then you also talk about Yoga Nidra. And I know that one of the events you've done recently was a Yoga Nidra event. And just because there's going to be listeners who do yoga but maybe haven't heard about it, it strikes me that there's a lot of similar practices that are kind of resonating with liminal dreaming in these different worlds, and it's like we're pointing or kind of uncovering something that has sort of been hidden in plain sight, but that Yoga Nidra is an example of a kind of parallel practice that is increasingly noticeable in the yoga world. So can you talk a little bit about Yoga Nidra and how you approach it, and as a kind of workshop leader and also developer of these nidras?
Sure. So Yoga Nidra, like asana practice, is something that is referred to in very ancient texts, although mostly codified. How we practice it in the modern world are mostly codified in like the 60s and 70s. And Yoga Nidra, you have people lying down and you're leading them through. It's like a guided meditation. But the idea is that you're taking people into a place where they're, which deeply, deeply relaxing physically, and where you have access to different parts of consciousness. I tend to talk about the Pratyahara stage, or the 8 limbs of yoga, which is the liminal zone between outside and inside, where you're dropping really down. And some teachers, like Rod Stryker, says that Yoga Nidra is bringing you into hypnagogia. I mean, some Yoga Nidra teachers also say, yeah, you're going into liminal dream space when you're doing Yoga Nidra. Some want to call it something else. Some say calling it hypnagogia is, they want to use a more specialized yogic term for it. But I think it's bringing kind of people into a liminal dream state. And all of the applications for liminal dreams, the ways that I talk about using liminal dreams, are ways that people talk about it with Yoga Nidra. So there's healing, both mental and physical healing. There's meditation, a kind of meditation and consciousness exploration. Uma Dinsmore-Tully in the UK is working with women in childbirth, using Yoga Nidra to help women through those processes. The I Rest Yoga Nidra tradition in the US, headed up by Richard Miller, is looking at PTSD and looking at pain, ways of using Yoga Nidra toward those ends. And it also, it's a very, very deep meditation. So the Yoga Nidra I did was at a meditation school. I was invited to teach at the Consciousness Explorers Club in Toronto, that's a group that works with a lot of different forms of meditation as consciousness exploration. And they're really, you were talking earlier about the meditation, which is what I think the Yoga Nidra is for, and opening up into those spaces. And at that event, a lot of other people were saying, because they were all meditators, in my meditation, sometimes I go into that space where I'm kind of back and forth between hypnagogia and meditation, which is an experience that you've had.
Yeah. I love talking about this, and it because it underscores a point that I'm actually getting more and more kind of convinced of as I've sort of explored it on Expanding Mind and talking with people, which is that the whole idea that there's like one way to meditate is really stupid. It gets in the way of a lot of stuff. If you're really devoted to one particular practice, great, go for it. See where it goes. But you read a lot of these meditation guides where there's very much a system, and they're filled with all these don't do this, and like, oh, if you're getting sleepy, beware of subtle dullness, which will drag your meditation down and get you lost in the weeds and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I think if you're trying for a certain kind of awakeness and you stay on this sort of fuzzy surface layer, you can get like stuck there and for a long time, but maybe that's okay. But one thing that comes out of that is I think a lot of meditators feel like they're not supposed to realize that meditation is developing mind training that enables you to consciously explore multiple dimensions of mind, psychedelics, and in this case, these dream realms or these hypnagogic realms. So you start feeling yourself getting a little sleepy, you start seeing lights, maybe you start seeing images and patterns, and there's a sense of kind of enchantment or maybe something a little spooky, because sometimes the faces that come are a little creepy or strange. And you're like, well, let's see what's down this, what's in this cavern. It's like your own D&D game or something. Spelunking, right, is a great analogy. And it just seems really important to say, yes, follow your practice, stick to the plan if that's what you're devoted to. But I think a lot of meditators will feel a great sense of relief and permission where you're like, yeah, you can go there too. And maybe you just do that once a week, or you do it when you're napping instead of at your pillow or whatever. Keep the dimensions separate to some degree. But it's really remarkable. And I think it's not just because you're seeing into the unconscious or witnessing these processes, but there's actually a kind of sense of power and encounter there that, to my mind, also has a lot to do with magic. And you don't talk as much about this in the book, but I know we've talked about it a lot, and you've had conversations with people for whom this is very true. But I think that a lot of occult practices on a pragmatic, nitty-gritty level are actually ways of sneaking into hypnagogia and playing with the strange sense that can be there, not always, but can be there, of like another world or another dimension or another kind of power, or this kind of a spectral, spooky, enchanted environment that you can kind of like work with, maybe like active imagination or directing visualization, but there's some other element about it that it feels like hypnagogy is showing us something about what a lot of occult experience is actually running on. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. And so for me, a lot of the practices that I am trying to develop around liminal dreaming do have resonance. So, for example, a thing I've been doing lately that I really enjoy is a form of automatic writing where because I can touch type, I sit back with my laptop, and when I'm feeling, and at this point I can slip into hypnagogia pretty much at will, and so I'll sit back and I'll get into a hypnagogic state, and with my fingers on the keyboard of my laptop, and then I will just start typing. Whatever it is that comes into my head. And that's, that is a really interesting experience of like what's in my mind. And it kind of like, I based it a bit on the John D. Enochian angel automatic writing, where you're letting the spirit come through you and you're sort of writing whatever it gives you. And so I feel like, and it's not like I feel like I'm necessarily getting messages from beyond, but I'm starting to see these different layers of what's happening in my own unconscious experience. Like I've identified like 4 stops along the way between awake and asleep, and each one I've identified through some sort of practice, and seeing the different things that my mind or that consciousness does, whatever, at these different steps along the way. And yeah, it's a meditation on like what was John D doing, or skrying. We have a friend in England, an esotericist, Julian Vane, who taught me like a skrying method of getting into hypnagogia and looking at like a powered down iPad or some really reflective screen and seeing what images form when you're in those spaces. There's definitely a lot of esoteric practices that I have discovered as I've been doing research.
And it's interesting is because it's almost kind of up to you whether you treat it esoterically or not. I mean, it's like, one of the things that the surrealists did is, the surrealists in the 20s and 30s were, really interested in the occult, but they didn't really think of it as like encountering other spirits or other planes of reality. They were like, hey, we can use these things to undermine and explore the world outside of kind of conventional rationality and ordinary everyday common sense. So they also loved automatic writing, but they didn't do it the way the spiritualists did it, which is the spiritualists were actually believing that the spirits were moving their hand and writing from that place. And the surrealists were like, hey, maybe it's just languaging on its own through me. But what strikes me, and I'm curious whether you see this or in your own experience or with other people, since you get to talk to all these people who tell you their stories, whether it's almost like a set and setting thing, where if you're staring at the iPad screen just to be like, I'm going to trip out on my own mind and kind of drift off into hypnagogic land, then maybe you're more likely to have these kinds of experiences. But if you go there and say, I'm going to use this as a scrying mirror to encounter the other planes or to encounter spirits who want to communicate with me, that your experiences might tend to be more like those as well. So it's almost like the liminal dream space is almost silly putty that can kind of respond to different intentions and different symbol systems and different religious ideas.
Nicely said. Yeah, that's very true. And I have a riff in the book. I have a chapter in the book that's about practice, because the book really is about practices and exercises. There's lots of, there's even an exercises workbook, but throughout the book, there's all of these exercises, ways that you can explore liminal dreaming and apply it. How to do yoga nidra, or how to do Jungian active imagination, or how to use dream incubation. There's a lot of practices, and I have a chapter about practice. And I'm a huge believer in practice, and in, like you were talking earlier about the meditation, or even when I was at this meditation school the other day, and what is meditation? People have such stringent ideas, and why are you doing it? And people are often like, well, this liminal dreaming thing sounds interesting, but why would I do it? And if just the exploration of your own consciousness is sort of not enough, that there's belief is a huge determinator of what experience people are having. And if you're somebody who doesn't really have much to do with the world of belief, like the world of belief isn't really where I linger. And so, of course, a lot of people who come to my workshops or come to my classes or read my work are people who are trying to contact someone in the spirit world, or who are, Bob Monroe, the famous Robert Monroe Institute, who coined the phrase out-of-body experiences, says that that hypnagogia is the launching pad for out-of-body experiences. Or there's a lot of different traditions that have used hypnagogia, and you're right. The experiences that people are having there, if their belief is around some set of whatever esoteric practices, and who they expect to encounter, or what they expect to encounter, or what they expect to happen, then that's more likely the experience that they're going to have. But one of the things I really love so much about liminal dreams, and I talk about this in the book, is that it's such unmapped territory for most of us. Most of us don't really have a sense of what we're going to experience there, because even though we all experience it, even though everyone goes through hypnagogia, it's been written about and talked about so rarely that it's a very, right now, I worry about gentrifying, honestly, because now I'm sort of talking about the space and trying to give people ideas about what to expect. But still, right now it's a very wide open space.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for, if you think that you're going to be meeting your dead cat in the spirit realms, that maybe that's the place to do it. And if you're just like, wow, I want to go into some really novel state of consciousness and see what is happening there in my mind, which is sort of what I'm doing, then it's there for that too.
Yeah, I think that's all really good point. I mean, I really resonate with what you're saying. And, at the end of High Weirdness, I actually just turn it back on myself, and I say how a lot of the things that I've been interested in since I was a young man are now part of the mainstream: psychedelics, Buddhism, Burning Man, the occult, like all this stuff that was, not super marginal, but pretty marginal in the 80s and 90s. Even forward, are now just part of the stew. And and then I'm like, well, I helped this make this happen. Like I wrote
exactly.
I've been the guy, like a guy, and now I'm like an authority on this stuff because I've been doing it for so long. And it's a strange mixed bag, but I still think that, particularly in this case, actually, if you compare it to psychedelics, it's really interesting. On the one hand, I believe that one of the reasons people are attracted to psychedelics now is because the psychedelic experience itself is always unpredictable. It's always full of novelty and unexpected elements, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but it's like your own movie that but you're telling it at the time. You're making it up at the time, and it's not even you. You're not in control of it. And people like that, especially in a world that feels more and more managed and algorithmically controlled and predicted and audience tested. And, it's like we're in all of these algorithmic feedback loops that are trying to anticipate our desires, anticipate our imaginations. And so here's a place I can go and no one can tell me what's going to happen, and I don't know. And so when it's happening, it's like, this is fresh and novel. But at the same time, because there's been 50 years plus of modern psychedelic culture, and because there's so much art that sort of depicts or reflects or expresses some element of psychedelic experience, that our own psychedelic experience is also kind of, if you will, stained by these cultural images and expectations. In a lot of ways, you see kind of images that are similar to images you've already seen that sort of resonate with the nervous system phenomena associated with psychedelics. So you're kind of exploring something in a new way. It's a remix, but it's also, the elements of it are coming very clearly from associations and images. But in the case of liminal dreaming, we don't really have those associations. It's not really clear what it is. So it's even fresher in a way.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I do love about it, and it's because, of course, the tendrils of the machine have gotten so good at going into our minds to sell us crap, basically. And even in psychedelic spaces, even in REM dream spaces, even in some of these weird alternative spaces, we're still, the machine still knows how to go in there and get hold of, what we're likely to imagine and be able to sell us stuff with it. I mean, the lucid dream machines that you can buy, or the psychedelic art that you can buy, or et cetera. But because this is such unmapped terrain, not yet anyway, there's yet to be any kind of effort to market and sell crap. It's one of the few places where you actually have freedom from the machine.
Yeah, and just for the sake of freshness. I mean, when people talk about, why would I do this? I mean, it's a great question. Why would I do this? And people talk about meditation that way, or psychedelics, and we always have this reason. We have to have a reason. And I'm, again, like, the more I think about meditation in this context, the more I think we're missing something really profound by our attempt to instrumentalize these altered states so quickly. It's for healing, it's for this, it's going to improve my this, I'm going to stop doing this, and blah, 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 on and on and on. And it's like we don't recognize the value of just a refresh, a tonic, a sparkling glass of lemon water in an afternoon that sort of tingles our senses, like or like a nice bath in the unexpected. That just the encounter with novelty as novelty, it does have an effect. I mean, it is refreshing. It does allow us to set aside our normal ego and normal intentions, but we don't have to get anything out of it. And one of the things I think that's sort of subtly radical there's two subtly radical things in the way you present liminal dreaming that's fun to watch people kind of wrestle with, and they don't mostly get to my mind, deeper implications of it. One is that you're perfectly happy going, well, you don't really bring that much back a lot of the time. You go deep into these other worlds and it's amazing and strange, but the next morning you're like, I don't remember. I know I had a little liminal dream, but, and you're not like saying, so you go like, yeah, if you want to remember it more, you can do this and that and take naps instead of going to sleep. But there's another part of this message. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, You're also that you that's plunging into these alternate dimensions as you go into sleep, riding that amazing train. And even if you mostly don't remember it, there's still a value just to that, which I think is really radical. And then the other thing is the way that you totally avoid the overwhelming emphasis in dream literature, and especially popular dream literature, on interpreting symbols, interpretation. Yeah. And I just, I love your riff on this. I've known you for a long time, and you've been a dreamer for a long time. Even before you got into liminal dreaming, you're an unusually prolific and rich REM dreamer, and you've had this tweet a day for years now of like tweeting your dreams, and like every day you have some amazing dream, and I have like a dream like that like a couple times a month. So you've always been very in touch with the dream realm. But as long as I've known you, you never go, wow, I wonder if that was a symbol of my mom, or it was always just about having the experience itself was enough. You didn't need to get an extra meaning from it. And that's an unusual attitude. Where did that come from? I know it's always been sort of part of your approach, but what is it in your own experience, or when you were young, or when you started paying attention to your dreams, that you didn't get it as into that interpretation thing that so many people seem incredibly focused on?
I think that the focus on interpretation and the focus on it has to have a specific purpose in order to do it are the same thing, which is we really privilege a certain part of our experience, right? We really privilege the forward Apollonian, rational, goal-oriented. We really privilege that part, and anything that's not contributing toward that, we tend to devalue. And I think that people don't spend enough time dropping into imagination. I don't think people spend enough time away from the non-goal oriented modes of moving forward. And I think that people don't privilege the experience that they're having in the dream. So, I'm a phenomenologist at heart with all of this stuff. I'm really interested in the experience. And if the only thing that matters in this amazing experience that you're having in the dream, whether it's a REM dream or a liminal dream, is its relevance to the waking, goal-oriented self, I mean, that's really devaluing an enormous amount of your experience. And so and I do have dreams where this, this is probably, symbolic of that, or where I'm engaged. I mean, sometimes some dreams are, it's just very clear. But then other dreams are, it's experience. It's like saying, well, what did my walk mean? I took a walk through the park. What did that mean? Why is that walk important to my work life? And the answer is, like, it's a walk. Be open to what's happening in the walk, and perversely and paradoxically, in fact, that does help the goal-oriented mind. There's all these studies now about how Mark Pesce just sent me one about how much play all the experiments they're doing now with like play or, dream space or whatever, and how much better people think, or, how much more people succeed in those other modes if they let themselves go into the realms of play. So paradoxically, not having it be concerned with goal-oriented, like the goal-oriented behavior, is better for the goal-oriented behavior. But I really do think people devalue that experience, and the whole way that we're all about those parts of ourselves are one of the problems that I think that we have with world. We don't spend enough time going into the more yin, meditative, dream, open connection places. And I think if we did, we might not be as messed up as a culture as we are.
Well, one thing about that is the fact that even though in some ways this is a very solitary practice, you can barely sometimes bring very much back for yourself, let alone for other people. And while, people use it for creativity and invention, and you talk about examples of that in your book, in a way, another way of bringing it back that's, to me, I think a little more interesting, has to do with just dreaming together. The idea of dreaming together, whether it's liminal dreaming or it's this aeronauticum that you've been doing for, off and on for many years, of having people come together and share a sort of dream practice, not necessarily liminal dreaming practice, but deep dreaming practice, and sort of dreaming together. And there's something that happens there, even if you don't all go to the same place in your dream, which is the kind of thing that people would like to believe and seems to happen sometimes in people's experience. But more just the whole sort of social affirmation of the value of dreaming and dreaming together. And there's this kind of beautiful paradox where you're doing something that's very personal and subjective, and yet by making it collective, which is kind of what you're doing by writing this book and giving workshops and lectures and going around and kind of drawing the dreamers together, by making it collective in that way, something else happens that's really interesting.
Yeah, and think about it. So it's both the most incredibly personal experience, it's liminal dreams particularly, because they tend to be a swirl of non-narrative, free associative images, whatever, memories, whatever it is, are intensely personal, right? It's what is happening for you in your own history, in your own internal version of the world out there. And yet every person who has ever lived has dreamed. And what a whacked out weird thing to have in common with everyone. We all have these bizarre, visionary, otherworldly experiences all the time. So it's, to think about like eating and sleeping and those kinds of things is common to all humans. Yes, okay. But to think about dreaming as common to all humans, sometimes that really blows my mind.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. And that's what I really like about, or it's one of the things I really like about your work in general. And to me, it says something about who you are as a person too. Is that you're in a lot of ways you're able to draw attention to the magic and enchantment that's just in the ordinary way that we already are, rather than some other place. So it's like, the way you decorate our house, and the way you're like, oh, look at the way the light's coming through, the stained glass window and falling on this one beautiful object. And like, it's stuff that I just never notice because I'm always in my head going, oh, what am I going to do next? Blah, blah, blah. And you're like, look at that thing. And in a way, liminal dreaming is like that. It's like this marvel that's right there, and it requires a little bit of work to tune into, but not that much, and certainly, as you point out, much less than the far more desirable, supposedly, goal of lucid dreaming, which is hard to do, and whatever. We could talk. You can even criticize it in some ways, which I think are actually kind of interesting, but liminal dreaming is just right there. It's just we just all do it, and it's this marvel and enchantment and tool and space, but we normally just don't even know about it. We don't even think about it. We don't notice it, but it's right there.
Right. We don't, right, exactly. We don't notice it, but it's right there. And probably that's the thing that people say most often who are, people writing me now about the book or who show up. A lot of people say, I have had experiences with liminal dreams, with hypnagogia or hypnopomnia for my whole life. And many people I've been using them to make art, or I've been using them to come up with ideas or to problem solve. But I never knew it had a name. I never knew it was a thing. I never really, or even just, I had those experiences when I'm falling asleep. I hear, the alien radio station when I'm falling asleep regularly. And I never occurred to me that other people are having this experience, and that it's a space that you can go into and open up and really enjoy. It's kind of like the easy, free, cheap, always available, hangover-less high that you can drop into at any time. And and that's, so we were talking about earlier about like a lot of the esoteric meanings. And I do have, the book has a series of these mini histories of different traditions that have used liminal dreaming and ways that they've used it. And if you have belief or if you have things that you want to do, you can totally use it as a tool in those ways. But it's also just this extraordinary experience that's always right there. When I give talks and workshops at a lot of different places, but one of the venues, or not venues, but types, is at festivals. I give workshops at a lot of festivals, and in the same way that you have the opening line that you use for this podcast, whenever I'm at a festival, I always start with, there's a swirling psychedelic space behind your eyes that you can access anytime.
Yeah, and I just want to add one, we're wrapping it up here, but one thing in addition to that is that there is a kind of knowledge that comes through this, in addition to the play and the yumminess and the strangeness and the pure experience, which is that I think it does actually shed light on a number of other kinds of experiences that people have that otherwise seem more otherworldly than they need to be. So like you mentioned, I tune into an alien radio station, and I know you're kind of referring to experiences that have happened to me where I've gone very deep into very weird liminal dreaming things. Like for me, my liminal dreams have been much stranger than all but a handful of my REM dreams or my lucid dreams. And they've had a lot to do with other experiences that I've had on psychedelics, and there's a handful of them that have been extremely peculiar, very esoteric, very extraterrestrial. And what I realized about them afterwards is that if I had a different kind of attitude, a different kind of belief set, I could very easily take the raw material of these experiences and build a narrative of, let's say, alien abduction, because I've had experiences that are very like aspects of what people report in those zones. And so some of what I think is happening in paranormal claims is not that there aren't paranormal things happening on some level, but that there's a kind of, there's not a middle ground to sort of acknowledge how weird hypnagogia can become, where there's things in the environment, like there seems to be spirits in your room, and the spirits are sitting on your chest, and the old hag and all that stuff that we also touch on in your book, but we probably don't have time to do it now. But in that sense, it's in addition to being exploration, I think it also illumines for people who are interested in altered states and paranormal experiences and otherworldly accounts and the kind of stuff kind of people listen to this show, that it actually gives you a handle on a lot of marginal zones of experience that help illuminate other things that people talk about.
Yeah, that's a totally great ref. And there's so much. One of the things that really happened to me when I was writing this book was I became so much more aware of the liminal zones just in life. I through the writing of the book, I came up with this idea that I call liminal mind, which is really starting to understand how much one's own mind, one's own experience, one's own imagination actually determines the world that you're moving through. I mean, both does and doesn't, in that create your own reality. I mean, the city doesn't care if you're not there, but if you are there, then the city that you're moving through is your own projection of yourself and what's in your mind. And so there's so much liminal between the concrete shared reality and the internal world that's ours alone. And starting to tune into the liminal dreams will really start to highlight a lot of what's happening in the liminal out there.
Yeah, that's wonderfully said. I mean, we can even end it there. And that's, again, what's sort of nice about our books coming out together and in the way in which they share a commitment to liminality as such. And that the specific ways we're talking about it, dreams, psychedelics, even thought itself, is about exploring the liminal, which by its very nature is not just one thing. Liminality is kind of a zone that you find in many, many different dimensions of reality, but the different liminal zones resonate with each other.
Yeah, nicely said.
All righty, well, I think we'll have to end it there. You're coming back, you're doing some more events. Where can people find out more about the events coming up?
If you go to liminaldreaming.com, you'll see a lot of the exercises and things that I'm talking about. If you follow me on Twitter at Oneirofer, Oneirofer, at Oneirofer, I tweet a dream a day. I've been doing that for a decade, and I also talk about my events. And if you go to urbandreamscape.com, you'll see my upcoming events.
Excellent. So a lot of places to check it out. Well, thanks again for joining us on Expanding Mind, Jennifer.
It is truly my pleasure, Erik.
All righty. Until next week, folks, keep your minds open.